Welcome back, everyone, to the Disaster Tough podcast, where we share insights into the big plays and right calls of leadership. We dive deep into the stories, lessons learned, and ideas that will help you in the field. Let's go. Welcome back to the Disaster Tough podcast. I'm your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this week's episode. I get to interview somebody very cool. I think we've crossed paths tons of different times. We were mentioning all the different people we know, so we might give a couple shout outs later. But Branch Chief John Conklin, he's with the Pentagon. He's going to be talking about what he does at the Pentagon, as well as all the other cool things he's done throughout his career. He spent some time in Florida. I spent some time in Florida, so we get to talk about that. Also the DC days, and really the unique perspective of helping organizations. The Pentagon is a very unique organization in itself, but helping organizations as a whole get ready for, respond to, recover from the whole deal in disaster readiness. And so without any further ado, I'm going to have John come on the show. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Morning, everyone.
So let's talk about how awesome you are, because not only do you have a very cool job, it's unique in so many different ways. You have, multiple different stakeholders that people don't interact with very often. You have a storied career already before that. And so just for like our audience sake, can you go through and talk a little bit about, you and your story?
Yeah, sure. I got involved at the ripe old age of 14 as in the volunteer fire service in Pennsylvania. And that ran concurrent throughout a good piece of my career. Went through a couple major events, the 1977 Johnstown flood, the 1979 Three Mile Island accident. And I went to college and I was an industrial engineer. So I actually did that for 18 years of my professional life. But the backdrop was always fire rescue, hazmat. Right out of college, I worked two jobs because we're all poor at that time, and worked for York County 911 in emergency management in Pennsylvania. So I did that for 2 years, and that's really where I got the flavor for emergency management. It was immediately post FEMA creation days. And I believe I was on the very first Peach Bottom nuclear power plant evaluation in the exercise that was run by the NRC.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was pretty cool. I didn't know what I was really doing at that point, but I went there and observed, some of the population or simulated population evaluation going to a local middle school.
Awesome.
So I kept that going, and I moved to a municipality again in Pennsylvania, and that was in the backyard of TMI. And we had a lot. I got named the local emergency management coordinator. So I think probably one of the best roles in the world is being a local emergency manager, or at the county level as well. That's really where the rubber meets the road. And you learn your skill sets and you hone them. And it was just fantastic. I had blizzards. I had Susquehanna River flooding, federally declared disasters, Harrisburg International Airport's in the backyard, less than a mile away from my home. An airplane crash into the river, train derailments with hazmat. I mean, just obnoxious type of EM things that really hook you in. But being the TMI was only 2 miles away again from my house. Every few years, you'd go through that federally evaluated exercise at the local level. So it was great practice to pull in an EMA, emergency management staff. They're all volunteers. And, to be able to go through and to be able to hit those, those touch points that they require you to hit and to plan for it. So I made a decision at the coaxing of people at the federal and the state level, John, got to do this for a career. So I did a career change and landed actually the top spot in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania, as the director. So I had 911, I had emergency management, hazardous materials response team. And 3 months into that, I had a huge building explosion. I think it was really the first test for the Chemical Safety Board. And their investigation. Had the Atlantic strike team from the Coast Guard there for several weeks. It was a big deal. International news. I really honed my public information officer role there.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. Um, and the rest is history. I went to Florida, Broward County, my city of Miami,
Hmm.
um, and just dove in. Sometimes I didn't know where I was jumping into, but I'm proactive. I dive right in and tackle things, and you know, um, I always equated everything that I did to being like the conductor of an orchestra, and you're up there and you're coordinating and you're keeping the motion and the tempo rolling along, and making sure the music comes together. And same thing with dealing with disasters. You want to bring that disaster situation to a successful ending. So
The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at l3harris.com right now. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. Maybe we should have some Mozart playing in the background of this episode just to really highlight that. I actually love the conductor. There's about four things you said in there that I want to highlight, but the
sure.
conductor is probably the easiest way for somebody to understand like what we're doing. We talk about emergency coordination, and I really hit on that pretty hard. And I say it's kind of like project management, but for emergencies. And I try to use vernacular that other people understand. But talking about it as an orchestra, and all these different things they all have their own part to play, and you're kind of there to help organize that. Phenomenal explanation. I was at the Florida Hazmat Symposium this year as a keynote speaker, and we went through several lessons of different leadership styles that we could gain from different incidents that have happened in history. And one of the first ones that I called out was 3 Mile Island. And I would love your perspective on it. I have some small personal perspective because my father was actually there. He was an engineer there, funny enough. But if I recall, it was somebody giving, I think, the governor advice on, hey, I think an incident's going to happen. You should do something. And there was like no real great evidence that something was going to happen. And everybody else said it was going to be fine. And he chose to evacuate the children and pregnant women, and that evacuation process is considered to saving a lot of lives. And it turned out to be a great success. Is that, from a guy who was there, is that what happened? What are some of your intel on that perspective? Because we look at it as a success.
Well, a good friend of mine, and you may know the name at least, Kevin Malloy. He used to be on the staff at Emmitsburg at PMI for several years before he retired. But Kevin was the emergency management director for Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. That's where TMI is located. And it might have been Kevin that actually gave that advice, because he was very attuned to what was going on. Obviously, he knew about the plant and the workings, and what the potential effects would be. Who wouldn't, with a nuclear power plant in your backyard? And and just simple fact that his county was host to the Pennsylvania Capitol. He had those types of interactions with the elected leadership. And I know for a fact that they did seek counsel and advice from him.
So many times that, emergency management is built into politics. It always has been, it always will be. It's a public safety thing. And the fact that, they listened to the advice, the fact that the advice was given, is credited to some wins there. With so many different types of experiences, guarding from whether it's 3 Mile Island or hurricanes or working at the county level. I love the local level, but I also hate the local level so much. It's like every rainstorm, every hurricane, every tornado warning, you're up for it. And so huge shout out to everybody who has, they say every disaster is local for a reason. I mean, you're there, you get a ton of experience, but it can be pretty exhausting. And um, you know, From that perspective, it's tough. So, from all these different experiences from every level of government, going into the Pentagon, Pentagon has several things that make it unique. It's always a target. I mean, that's the obvious one, right? Like it's a target for foreign and domestic actors who suck, and you have it's highly political. It's in the heart of DC or right outside the DC, but basically heart of DC. There's all these things that are happening with the Pentagon. In your role, what is your scope of focus? Because there has to be so many things that you and your staff, and a shout out to Mason, who I know, who worked for you there. So, what is your scope of work there?
Well, during blue sky events, obviously we're working on policy. And yeah, I referenced Pete Gaynor before. He's one of your guests. Pete had a huge discussion on policy and, getting laws passed and things like that. And that's a big part of what my shop does. Uh, we'll work on the Department of Defense directives, the DoD's, any information papers, things like that, SOPs, charters, and yes, that's a large part of it. And there's a maintenance schedule, and it's not fun, but the governance really is what drives everything and what everyone's supposed to do up and down the chain. So that's uh, not the sexy part, is response and recovery. Yeah, so that's a part of it. That also then plays into the planning aspects. So we do a lot of the planning, the whole family of plans. Um, and you mentioned it being with the Pentagon and the target and things like that. We have our responsibilities under the Federal Continuity Directive 1, just like all federal agencies do. And COOP is a huge part of what we get involved with. We do have within our emergency management division have a continuity of operations program manager. My boss, the division director, is the agency COOP coordinator. So we're constantly exercising and doing those things from a COOP perspective. Um, Again, all the national level exercises that come up, and it's just have one in May, have one in July, have one in October. So it's just you know you get down and dirty, and you actually move people to your COOP locations, and you just test communications, a whole C2 part of it. So that's fun. It's necessary, and you hope you never have to pull that trigger to make it happen. But we exercise that pretty extensively. So that also plays into the operations side of the fence. And a big piece of what I do is manage the Pentagon Emergency Operations Center. That is located in the Pentagon. It's just outside our administrative offices. And to be honest with you, with everything that goes on between the NLEs and different events, different visitors to the Pentagon, last year I activated a total of 31 times, and I'm probably getting close to 20 already, and we're only mid-April.
Yeah, and it's an election year, so you might have a lot of visitors there, right?
Right. And to be honest with you, in advance of and just back up a little bit, in advance of all the operational things and the EOC activations, there's all the planning meetings that take place, right? Your concept and objectives meeting. We just had one that FEMA Region 3 and DCH SEMA led for the NATO 75th Summit, which is coming up in July. All right, so we're already just moving into one thing after another. The end of this month, we'll have the initial planning conference. So I get involved in all those types of things, even though most of that type of large events take place in the district. God bless my colleagues at DCH SEMA. They go through a lot, and it's totally nonstop for them on a regular basis, as is with most urban area security initiative cities, big cities. But yeah, I try to keep us involved, keep us to be a player. We have our own presidentially appointed folks that are part of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, which I'm a part of, that they have to be accountable to and protect. So it's working hand in hand with them for state visitors to the Pentagon, providing them with open source type of for official use only, law enforcement sensitive information for different events that occur. There's always the intelligence piece, which again, being in my agency, I've got clear access to any of the intelligence that's coming down the pike. So it's that's the fun part, is putting all those pieces together, and with the, yeah, and with the experience, helping to shape maybe how they look at things a little bit differently.
Oh gosh, you are like the most interesting man in the world to me right now. I have so many
Hardly,
questions for you. Yeah. No, it's honestly fascinating. I honestly don't know how we haven't been crossing paths because I do so much with the DoD. And for the users, for the end user perspective, this is being recorded before I go to UK, literally on Saturday to meet with NATO. And I was requested by the Marines to be the keynote speaker on how to provide emergency services during urban warfare. And so I wrote a chapter for the Marine doctrine on basically tenets of urban warfare and emergency services, saving Marines' lives. And then they want me to present that to NATO. And so you would be a great resource in the future, where as I'm working with them to ping ideas off of you because you also speak that language. I've always been a civilian, but being in so many type 1 disasters, and working really closely with NATO for the last several years, we've created this great relationship where I'll bring things up as I meet work with different groups, like learning about crust syndrome from USAR and saying, hey, what do you guys do when you're pulling people out of rubble piles? Well, I was at a NATO meeting in 2021 and I brought up crust syndrome. And I believe it was the colonel from Austria, could have been Austria or Germany, but I'm pretty sure it was Austria. They went back and there was kind of an aha moment because they had pulled out a lot of their soldiers out of rubble piles after IEDs and some other things. And they found that there was a high mortality rate after they pulled people out. They had no idea about crust syndrome, and we started talking about that. And so it started this process of just identifying things that, whether it's USAR, fire, security, evacuations, public messaging, all that stuff. Another example, and I'm going to talk too long here, is what's happening in Gaza. And, I was talking to a counterpart, we'll say a counterpart, and I said, hey, if you would have told me you're going to try drive 2 trucks into Gaza where people are starving, they're desperate, they're concerned, there's also conflicting interests, like in Hamas, how everybody else is there, and you're just going to drive these 2 trucks in, and what do you think is going to happen? Of course, they're going to stampede, right? Like there's going to be this big rush, and then the other big one, the big, like, faux pas for me was the airdrop. I call it the Dumbo drop. They just dropped all this stuff right on top of the people. Again, they're desperate, they're exhausted, they're not thinking clearly, they might be uneducated, and they've never seen an airdrop. So they're watching this thing like, "Oh, I've never seen food fall from the sky before," and all of a sudden they get crushed. I was like, "We learned these lessons in Haiti. We learned these lessons in Vietnam. We learned these lessons in World War II. What are we doing here?" And there was kind of this realization that military officers switch jobs so frequently that there needed to be a constant of like best practices for civilian military operations and how to conduct those. And so it's been a kind of an honor, privilege, whatever, to be able to provide some guidance. But I've also been picking other experts in the field, and I know we're podcasting right now, but I definitely want to include you in those conversations because absolutely. Let's get better intel on whether it's saving soldiers' lives or Marines' lives, all the way through making sure that we don't have incidents that affect civilians. Because as soon as you lose the information game, goodbye, right?
Right.
So all those, I just like I'm pinging on so many different areas because you do that. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions because I have like 47,000 questions I want to ask you based off what you said, and
Okay.
I'll try to hold it to like 4 or 5 questions.
And
But
I held back too, John.
yeah, I bet you did. Yeah. I'm sure there's things you can't talk about. So, the first real obvious question I have is logistically, just with so much managing that orchestra, so many different things, so many activations. how big is your staff? I know Mason, sure, but how are you operating as a team?
Sure. Well, with any organization, you're obviously still looking for people, and you have turnover, you have retirements. Um, we have 3 military staff that are in our division as well, and we're rostered for 21. So we actually have 5 uh, open positions with certs right now that we're trying to fill. So that's one of our struggles from a management perspective. My fellow branch chief and my director and I, just trying to figure out what are the various missions that we have coming up and staffing issues and you know, uh, you know, just things happen to staff that you need to backfill them or try to cover in other ways by shifting some people from one project to another. So it gets back into project management, right? And but I just want to touch upon something that Pete talked about, and it's how you deal with the electeds, or in my case, our senior leadership. The SES levels. That you because they're not thinking about staffing, manpower, whether you have capability to, execute the mission that they uh, continually keep throwing on you. So that's that walk the walk. It's a gray area, middle line that you have to, you know, uh, be able to communicate upward. That look, we're tapped out. You got to prioritize for us. So um, I think that's probably one of the big driving home points that I would give your audience is, really, really try to get that senior leader intent. It seems to be so lacking in many organizations, and uh, without that either written or very clear senior leader intent, that leaves division directors, in my case, with trying to assume or insinuate where what the priority is, and it gets diluted, and then we end up working on multiple taskers, right? And some aren't really critical over the top of another. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. You hit on something, and I wanna see if you have the same opinion as I do. But I have found when sometimes when there's a lack of training on leadership, the leader, especially in EM, because we need to get better at leadership capability within EM, and I think we're addressing that by having somebody like you on here who has those capabilities. What I have found is that somebody will say, "Well, this is my leadership intent. Like this is what I'm talking about," but it's so vague, right? And when you address that, they'll say something like, "Well, I'm just trying to hoping that you figure it out." But the reality is, like, they actually don't know. And I think it's better to just be like clear, concise. This is exactly what I'm looking for. You tell me, kind of thing of like, you heard that right, right? Like, tell me what you just heard. And man, if we can just eliminate distractions, emergency managers manage so many things. I do wonder how many of those things ultimately, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feeling, just don't matter, right? Like, there's a great thing that I've learned from military counterparts is about time sensitive. Like at one point, whatever the information is, it doesn't matter anymore. We have to move on to the next thing. And sometimes I feel like we're trying to do so many things. So it's like, oh, like are you missing the boat here a little bit? I don't know. Do you have those same kind of feelings sometimes, or maybe not? I don't know. Where do you fall on that?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with everything you said there. It's uh, at the so even at the local and county level. In Pennsylvania, it's a Commonwealth, so we have local municipalities and cities, and then we have county level. Some states are just county level, but it's considered local. Uh, but trying to educate elected officials or other, borough manager or city administrator on what emergency management is. It's always, always, always been a struggle. There's IS courses, there's G and L series courses and workshops, to try to educate them. But time's always an issue, and in many cases, they just don't care. They expect you to get the job done. So I think that's just a continual headache, right? That we have to put on as emergency managers. Um, I would think also that if we're able to, like you said, go back and clarify and confirm, I heard you say this, it wasn't clear. Is this truly or what you're asking us to do? And when they do that, that sort of opens up the door, um, where you can go ahead and have that conversational type thing. It doesn't have to be just, they're giving you a task. So I try to get in front of we report directly to our agency deputy director. So I advocate to my senior leader, my division director, that on very important tasks that I'm required to do for my branch, that I really want to brief the deputy director on my courses of actions and get his approval, get his buy-in, and that's been successful.
I'm gonna play devil advocate because I agree with you 100%. Everything you're saying, I agree with. For the listener who's listening and saying, "Oh, my boss doesn't give me clear intent," too bad. If your boss still doesn't do that, it's on you to clarify or figure it out. Sometimes, not nobody's perfect, right? Even if the author is always right in their mind, right? They always understand what they're saying, and so if and Pete has a master class, literally a master class
Yes.
on that. So everybody should take that leading through crisis or leading during crisis class, which we promote on our show, to be honest. But in addition to that, like the follower needs to be able to read the room. And I'll give you one of my fun experiences, I guess, in disaster is I was in Hurricane Harvey, and my team lead would say something like, "I want to know something right now." I knew right now always meant 15 minutes. I had 15 minutes, no matter what, to provide him something. And if it was beyond that, then, uh-oh, moment. So I go home on a rotation after 6 weeks, and the wildfires start in Southern California. I think it was also, it was like Mendocino Complex and Santa Barbara and that whole area.
Mhm.
Anyways, I was home, but the wildfire started, and so my boss, Rodney Melsick, who's big mentor of mine, he calls me and says, "Hey, I need you to report to Cal OES." I'm like, "All right." So I go to Cal OES and I say, "Hey, I'm on the national strike team, National IMAT West, whatever, and I'm here to help. I do GIS. Let me see if I can, help out somehow." And they had the FEMA Region 9 team. And they're like, "Hey, Bob Fenton wants this information right now." And I said, "Okay, what does right now mean?" And they're like, "I think by the end of the week." And I was like, "Okay, let's figure out what Bob actually wants." And then he started asking for a request of some GIS stuff. And there was multiple people and there was like his deputy to the section chief to like somebody else, and then finally to me. And I kept on making, down this telephone line what I thought people thought he wanted. And after the fourth time of getting it wrong, I finally was like, "Screw this. I'm not even on FEMA Region 9." I walked up to him and said, "Hey, I'm John, National. I'm at West. I'm the guy trying to make your product. What do you actually want?" And he told me. And I knew immediately it was not what he wanted. And so I went back to my desk. 30 minutes later, I had what I knew that what he was trying to articulate, and I gave it to him, and he goes, "Yeah, this is exactly what I've been looking for." And that reading the room is a skill set that comes with experience,
Yes.
but it also takes a little bit of. For me, it was nothing. I felt like my job wasn't in peril because I didn't work for the guy, but at the same time, I wanted to respect his leadership, staff and the whole deal.
The chain of command.
Chain of command. But eventually you have to get the answer right and move on to the next project. It takes little bit of guts to go up to the boss and say, "Let me hear what you're saying. Whatever you say, okay, I'm gonna go back. I'm actually gonna think what you are trying to articulate and be able to do that." I don't know how to teach that skill set, but I think I wouldn't have been able to do that on year one. I was able
Right.
to do that several years later. I don't know.
Well, I've seen a tactic used in training environments where when you go into your various breakout groups, they'll give one person at the front of the line and you line up, right, with spaces. And you can't have the written material handed from the next person to the next person, the next person. It's all audible, right? It's all verbal. And the message that the first person getting that, he or she has exactly what's written down in that paper. And then they have to transfer that within a certain time frame to the next person. until it gets to the end, and then the last person then tries to state what was actually written down. It never comes out. So that reinforces your story, which I thought was a great story. And you need experience, and you actually need uh, some guts to sort of bypass that chain of command. Not all the time, there's appropriate situations to do that, but in your case, you were able to manage that effectively.
Well, I gave him 4 times, right? I mean, ultimately, I wanted to work within the chain of command. Burning bridges, we have a very small field. Burning bridges is, usually not a good thing. They have to
Right.
be like, I was gonna say a name, but, a former EM who did some pretty stupid stuff with a young kid, and I don't know, disgusting, right? Like, you have to be like that level of a person. Otherwise, most people just have different opinions and different lifestyles and backgrounds, and learning to work within that. At one point, though, the mission matters above everything else. We were in a
Right.
wildfire. He needed the information. He was gonna go on the media, I think, and he needed to look good. FEMA had to look like they knew what they were talking about, and we actually did. We just need to get the right information to the decision maker and to the decision holder. And so it's like, whatever the scenario is, I have a philosophy, and maybe this is like the philosophy episode because we're going kind of back and forth here on cool things, but um, essentially, my wife and I figured out very early in our marriage that if it wasn't life saving, then it really doesn't matter. If like whoever just wanted to do the thing more, if she wanted to do a painting class, but I didn't, but she really wanted to, it wasn't life or death. So I'm going to go to the painting class. And guess what? I've learned lots of new and fun things by doing that. At the same time, I have other hobbies that she particularly probably wasn't excited about. But now, like, we have lots of new things that we've learned from each other. And I think the same thing can apply in work. Like, there's always tasks. I'm so tired of hearing people like, I don't want to do that. I'm like, get over it. Just do it. And you might actually learn something, and you'll become more complete as a person by doing the things you don't want to do in your job by just instead of just focusing on what you want to do all the time. I don't know. That's
Yeah, at least to get exposed to what's in front of you. Whether you decide to change a career or, take that up as a specialty, that's up to you.
I mean, you did that, right? Engineer to fire
Yeah.
engineer to like emergency manager.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, as somebody who has done that successfully, I mean, it sounds like you've been able to follow new passions that you were able to discover along the way. For somebody who's young in the field, we're coming to the end here, and this is kind of that advice moment where you can provide to them for trying new things in a career, for testing out new capabilities. Um, for somebody who, man, I've met a lot of young people recently. When I say young, I mean young in their career, 20s or whatever, and they're so afraid to try something new because they're afraid to look bad at it. They're afraid to like fail or whatever. For somebody who has been able to successfully navigate that and do very well, what would be your advice to them?
Well, in my role as a previous regional president for a membership organization representing the emergency management field, um, I've I've always prided myself on mentoring soon-to-be graduates or students in their master degree programs, and also military folks transitioning and taking their DD 214 and how to make that civilian worthy, right? Because that's a struggle too. And I think a lot of it has to deal with networking. Get involved in different types of things. Emergency management as a career field is so huge. You can get into a variety of different things. Sky's the limit, right? You just don't have to be um, getting response related. So it's really great. So get involved, pick something that really interests you, like think outside the box, and just I don't think you have to start at a low level of the pay scale, that type of thing. Um, and it's really a big hot topic right now in our career field, especially with new graduates. How do you get your foot in the door and things like that. But I think the way the job market is, there's all sorts of positions, and it's really how you market yourself and how you take those experiences, whether it's um, um, something you did while you were in college or you volunteer, like I did as the fire department, right? So I was able to take all those types of things and eventually over time get them to a place where I could land some really top leadership positions in my opinion. So get involved with exercises, uh, volunteer. So don't give up.
You just said something that a really great friend of mine said, who's on the show maybe 3 years ago, and that reminds me to get him back on. His name is William Jackson. I went to Georgetown with him, and he never believed that he always had to start at the bottom. He actually went towards the top as much as he could to learn as much as he could to take on those roles. And the graduating perspective, I have 2 degrees in emergency management. I really pigeonholed myself with that one, but I love the field and I love learning. I think education is incredibly important, and I hope over the next several years, decades even, our learning capability just goes up and up and up. And so by the time people get out of there, they are true generalists on the foundations of EM, which I also think will help professionalize the field. But that being said, you know, trying something new and just doing it just to see how it works out. Just because you try something new doesn't mean you have to commit to that forever. Step into the role, do your best, give it the 100% that it deserves. And then when the job is complete or the project's complete, take a step back and say, okay, like, do I want to do this? You mentioned earlier in this podcast, and I loved it. You were like, hey, I was a volunteer firefighter. I was an engineer for, I think 13 years is what you said, or 13 or 18 years. And you moved on and you're like, you had that thought process of like, I think I want to do this full time. I think it's okay to do that. And I think it's also okay to say, hey, this isn't for me. The job isn't for everybody. And to learning different skill sets as well. But either way, John, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, for talking to me, to share lots of great knowledge. I know that the Pentagon is in good hands because of you, and hopefully good hands because of Mason. So shout out to him.
I
But we
will.
also we also have a mutual friend with Eric Cant. So
Yes.
big shout out to Eric, and also Pete. We brought you up a few times. I've brought up Pete in the last like 4 episodes via the guests, so he's getting lots of good marketing time. But either way, again, John, thanks for so much for coming on and talking with me.
Thank you, John. Take care.
Okay, everybody. If you got something out of this episode, which you should have, it was awesome. I learned a lot. Hopefully, you learned a lot as well. John Conklin's experience is really phenomenal. It's somebody that you should really watch of how to do things right if you want to keep bouncing and growing in your career. I mean, he's doing some really cool stuff, not only for the Pentagon, but throughout his whole career, he's been a part of some really great experiences. Be willing to do that too. Be willing to take the next step into the dark, if you will, and I bet you'll have a career like John is having. If you got something out of this episode, like I said, gotta like and subscribe, but also go onto social media. Tell us what you thought. If you've learned a nugget, if you learned something, we'd love to know. If you have a question specifically for John, you can email us at contact@thereadinesslab.com, and we can forward that on to John. He just said he had open positions. So shout out to wanting to work with a very cool guy. But with that, we'll see you for the next one. We're out. Peace.